Okay, Shalom Aleichem. We're going to continue now and learn the third segment of the halachas of Beir, laws of separating on Shabbos. We're going to learn tonight about making a tea. It seems like such a simple act, and we're going to discover that there are many halachic intricacies involved in making a tea on Shabbos. And since we're focusing on the malacha of Beir, the laws of selecting, we're going to discuss the laws of selecting that pertain to making a tea on Shabbos. And we're not going to go into the laws of bishul. We get to the laws of cooking, then we'll discuss how the laws of cooking affect how to make a tea on Shabbos. But tonight, we're just going to focus on the laws of Beir, the laws of selecting. So, when tea bags became popular half a century ago, 60 years ago, there was a bit of a controversy if they're allowed to be used on Shabbos because of the laws of selecting. Because what happens is you pour the water into the cup and the water goes through the tea bag. And just like we learned last time about a nafel chvara, about a special tool that's used to separate something, that it's forbidden to use on Shabbos, forbidden to use something that will separate and filter something on Shabbos. So in a similar way, it would seem that there would be an issue to pour the water into the cup, and through the water would go through the tea bag and come out and taste as tea. So it would be an issue. So there's a tshuva, there is a halachic response that was written by the Minchas Yitzchak, and everyone today relies on this tshuva of the Minchas Yitzchak, who explains why it's okay to have a tea on Shabbos. But as we'll see, the explanation of Minchas Yitzchak leaves us wanting for more explanation. But let's first see what Minchas Yitzchak says. Minchas Yitzchak says that it says in a Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos, page Kuf Lamed Tesma Beis, page 139b, it says that you're allowed to put water on shmarim in order that they should, according to how he explains the Mishnah is referring to pouring water onto a wine strainer. You take the entire substance of the liquid and the pomace, and you strain it out, and now you're left just with the wine comes out, and you're left with the pomace. So you want to have water that has some of the taste of the wine. So you pour the water through the same strainer, and the water will come out with a taste of the wine. It sounds exactly like the case of the tea, where you're pouring water through the tea bag, and the water comes out tasting like tea. In a similar way, the Mishnah says you're allowed to pour water on the shmarim, on the pomace, in order that the water should have the taste of wine. That's what the Minchas Yitzchak says. And he says this is how the Mishnah Brura interpreted this Mishnah. The problem is that this is not the way that this Mishnah is conventionally understood by the Rishonim. We have two other ways that this Mishnah is interpreted by the Rishonim, and it seems that they both disagree with the way the Minchas Yitzchak presents this halacha. We have the explanation of Rashi and the explanation of the Ran, and both of them present alternative meanings to this Mishnah, and therefore, according to their interpretation of the Mishnah, we don't have an explanation of why it would be allowed to have a tea bag and to pour on Shabbos. So let's look at these two explanations. First of all, there's Rashi's explanation. Rashi is on the page of the Talmud, and there's also Rashi on the Rif. Sometimes you find textual differences between Rashi on the Rif and Rashi on the Gemara, and you'll be able to understand a little bit more of Rashi sometimes by the Rashi that's on the Rif. So Rashi says you're allowed to pour the water on to the pomace that has been strained through this strainer, and the wine has come out. Now you just have the pomace. So Rashi says you're allowed to pour the water there. Why would you pour the water there? Rashi says On the Gemara, Rashi says, Rashi says you pour the water on Shabbos on the pumice, which is in the strainer, on Friday, in order that it should be clean. What should be clean? So on the Rif, the Rashi's text is a little bit different. Rashi says, in order that the pumice should be clean, even when you strain the wine out of the pumice, there's still some of the wine left there. And you want to use the leftover grapes and the sediment and the seeds. You want to use them, let's say you want to put them into some other dish. You want to put them in you dip your challah into it, or put them inside to make a sandwich out of it, whatever you want to use it for. So you don't want to have the leftover wine in the pumice, and therefore you pour water on it to clean it. Just like you use water to wash a fruit, so too you pour water on Shabbos to clean the leftover grapes and seeds in the pumice, so that it should be clean. There should be no wine there. That's how Rashi explains this. So Rashi is not talking about using a strainer and pouring water into the strainer so that the water should come out with the taste of wine. Rashi is talking about cleaning the grapes from the leftover wine that's in the grapes. The purpose is not for the water, the purpose is for the grapes, which has to be understood itself, why Rashi would say that is okay. Why is that itself not an issue of Beirer? It could be, as Alter Rebbe writes in Siman Shin Yud Gimel, that once it's already been somewhat liquidy, you're allowed to strain it again to make it more liquidy. If it's already liquidy enough for you to drink, so then you're allowed to strain it again to make it better. So it could be that's what Rashi is referring to, why it's okay to pour the water there to clean it, because it's already, but either way, that's not the point for tonight. But it's clear from Rashi does not learn like the Minchas Yitzchak. And the Ran also has another interpretation of what this Mishnah means, and different to Minchas Yitzchak and different to Rashi. Says the Ran, it is normal to put water in a barrel which only has pumice left in it, and there's only a little bit of like congealed wine left there. And you pour the water onto the pumice, and now the water has the taste of wine in the water. Not pouring it through the sieve. You're pouring it into a barrel, which has the leftover pumice in it. The wine has been removed, but there's still a little bit of wine there, and there's a pumice there. So you want the water you're pouring into it, and so it should have the taste of wine. You want to derive some of the taste of wine from the grapes and the seeds that are left in the barrel, in order that the water should retain the taste of the water. So it's very different to what the Minchas Yitzchak is saying, because you're not pouring it through a sieve, you're pouring it into a barrel. So there's no straining happening. It's not at all similar to our scenario with the tea bags and the leaves, which are the water is going through the tea bag and it's coming out, and the tea bags and the leaves are staying in the tea bag. So that's a lot different. The question is, why is it okay? So the Minchas Yitzchak's explanation seems to disagree with Rashi's explanation and the Ran's explanation, and so it's very difficult to say that that's what the Mishnah Brura meant as well. And the Alter Rebbe actually rules both like Rashi and like the Ran, and the Alter Rebbe says that you're not allowed to pour the water through a sieve which has the pumice in it on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do that. You're only allowed, says Alter Rebbe, to do either like the Rashi says or like the Ran says. Or Alter Rebbe says in Sif Yud Aleph, like Rashi, you're allowed to pour water on the pumice to clean the pumice, to clean the leftover peel of the grape, etc. And you're also allowed to pour the water, it says in Sifchaf, allowed to pour water into a barrel that has pomace in it, so that the water will retain and absorb some of the taste of the wine. So Rashi clearly, the Alter Rebbe rules both like Rashi and like the Ran, but we don't have any source for being able to pour water onto a tea bag. And so the question is, where does this come from? So there are other possible explanations to say, but they don't seem to have a very strong foundation. Let's try to give some other explanations that may be the reason for why it's okay to use a tea bag, despite the fact that it seems boyer. It seems like you are using a strainer. You're using the bag to keep the leaves in and the water to go through it and to take the taste out. So why is it okay? So one explanation might be that the reason why this is okay is because you're not really making any separation. You're leaving the tea and the water and the bag all in the same cup. And since it's not making a separation in two separate entities, it's all remaining in the same cup. So that's why it might be okay in this scenario, because you're not ordinarily, the halacha is you can't separate the good from the bad. You can't separate the oichel, the food, from what you don't want. So in this scenario, why is this okay? You might want to say because it's in the same cup. But the author doesn't say that works. Let's take a look at the Alter Rebbe's explanation in Sif Yud Aleph and Siman Shin Yud Tes. The Alter Rebbe says, let's say you have in the same cup, you have food and you have things you don't want, and you know that the food particles are way more or less than the part you don't want. And you want to add water, so the part that you want will rise to the top, or the part you don't want to rise to the top, whatever. You want to cause some separation in the same cup, so make it easier for you to consume what you want to eat. So the Alter Rebbe says, if you have in the same cup food and waste, you're not allowed to put water in the cup to separate them. So Alter Rebbe clearly says that that there is an issue of separation in the same cup. And so therefore, in our scenario with a tea bag, that would be an issue. Just because the water and the tea bag and the tea, it's all in the same cup, doesn't mean that it should be okay. So there's another possible explanation. Again, it's not something which has a foundation. It's just another similar scenario we find in Siv Yud Chaf Gimel. What if you're not separating? You're just eating right now, and in order to eat right now, you have to make a separation. Siv Chaf Gimel talks about if there are worms in the water. You don't want to eat the worms. The worms don't taste good, and they're forbidden to eat it either way. So Alter Rebbe says you're allowed to put a cloth on your mouth, so then pour the water through the cloth, so that you will be able to drink the water. And why is this okay? Because even though you're separating, but still, since it's impossible to drink it without the cloth, so it's okay. There are other issues with the cloth, but there's a law, you're not allowed to wash something on Shabbos. You have to be careful what you're using. But either way, you're allowed to drink directly from the cup that has the worms inside it, because you have this cloth that's going to separate from the worms and the water. And we don't worry about the separation issue because you're not separating. This is just a process of eating. There's a similar thing which is also permissible, and that is when you're trying to get the best part of the cholent. For you, the best part of the cholent is the potatoes. So you're eating, you're moving the cholent aside to get the potatoes, and that's not considered separating on Shabbos. That's just your way of eating. You're trying to find the potatoes, you're not making a separation. So here, you might want to say that the reason why this is permissible is because you are immediately drinking the tea. You're putting the tea bag in, and right away you're putting the water in, and you're drinking it right away. It's not considered like separating which is not directly connected to the eating. It's you're right now eating as you're separating. You're pouring the water in and right away drinking it. Now, there is a difference between these two scenarios because in the example of the worms, you're directly pouring it into your mouth through the cloth. But in the example of the tea bag, you're pouring the water in and then you're drinking it. So it's not really such a strong reason to say that you should be allowed to put the tea bag in the hot water on Shabbos to make a tea. But let's say, first of all, there are those who are very careful on Shabbos not to use tea bags on Shabbos, and they seem to have they have a strong reason to think that way because all of these reasons we're saying are very weak. Perhaps all three of them together. The fact that the Minchas Yitzchak says that you're allowed to pour the water through the sieve, and the fact that it's in the same cup, and the fact that you're drinking it right away, maybe all the reasons together would contribute to making it maybe that's why people say that you're allowed to put the tea bag in. Either way, there are two other problems with the tea bag. What do you do with the tea bag when you're finished with the tea bag? Can you take the tea bag out of the cup? Similarly, you take the tea bag out of the cup, you're also separating what you don't want from what you want. You're taking the bad out of the good, which is a no-no, which is forbidden on Shabbos. You're allowed to separate to eat, but here you're taking the bad out of the good, and that's not considered separating to eat. When you take the good apples out of a bag of bad apples, that's considered part of the process of eating. When we take the bad apples out of the good apples, we said that's considered separating. So here you're taking the tea bag out of the tea, that's the act of separation. Why are you allowed to take the tea bag out? It should be forbidden to take the tea bag out. So Minchas Yitzchak addresses this question as well. And he says that although we find a similar halacha question about a fly, it says that if a fly comes in your soup on Shabbos, as we learned in the previous classes, you're not allowed to take the fly out of the soup on Shabbos. You can't remove the fly from the soup. Why can't you take the fly out of the soup? Because you're taking the bad out of the good. Because Yitzchak says perhaps over here, you're allowed to take this tea bag out of the tea because the tea bag is bigger than the fly. That's what he says. But that explanation also leaves us wondering because we find in Siv Vav and Siman Shin Yotes, the Alter Rebbe says that even by larger items, you might think they're larger items and therefore it's clear separation between them. The Alter Rebbe says that yes, there's such a possible explanation that if there's a larger item, you should be allowed. It's not gonna really, if you have smaller fish and bigger fish, and to take the bigger fish away from the smaller fish. Whatever you want right now is considered food. Whatever you want later is considered the garbage. You're not allowed to separate the bad from the good. But you might think it's not separating because it's so big and so noticeable. The Alter Rebbe says, Safek chiv chatas. He says that there is an issue. You should not rely on this just because they're big and therefore it should be okay. The Alter Rebbe says, being just because it's large is not enough of an explanation. And you can't separate two large items. If they're mixed together, doesn't matter how large they are, it's considered a mixture. You cannot separate the bad from the good. So how can you take the tea bag out of the water? So this idea, by the way, the Alter Rebbe says, you might be transgressing a biblical prohibition because it might be considered better, despite the fact that it's noticeable and large. It's not 100% forbidden. There's a doubt. It might not be considered a separation, but the Alter Rebbe says you shouldn't rely on this because it's a doubt of a biblical prohibition, therefore you shouldn't do it. So how can you take the tea bag out of the water? The Minchas Yitzchak's explanation seems to contradict what it says in Siv Vav, that you can't take even a large item out of the which you don't want out of something you want. There's no difference between seemingly a fly, and a tea bag, just because the tea bag is bigger. So the Minchas Yitzchak addresses this, and he draws on an explanation of Rabbi Chaim Noah. Rabbi Chaim Noah, famous Chabad chassid, who passed away in the 50s, he spoke about a different scenario which supports perhaps another angle of why it may be permissible to take tea bag out of the tea. When people would have chicken soup on Friday night, so they would take the chicken out of the soup after they finished eating the soup, and they would eat the chicken for Shabbos afternoon. So the Minchas Yitzchak says, the Chaim Noah says, how is it you're able to take the whole chicken out of the soup? If you don't want the chicken right now, you're taking the bad out of the good and it's forbidden. How are you allowed to take the bad out of the good? It should be usher. So the Chaim Noah says the reason why it's okay is perhaps that although the Alter says you can, even with big pieces, you can't. There is an issue of separation, but perhaps since it's a big piece and it's not separating two large pieces of things, but you're separating a solid from a liquid and it's large, so therefore it's not considered separating. So he puts it all together and saying it's a large piece and it's in liquid. It's not two solids mixed together. It's a solid and liquid. It's not considered really it's not really considered a mixture, and therefore you're allowed to remove the chicken from the soup. And Chaim Noah acknowledges that this is not something that there is a clear source for in the Gemara, but otherwise, Re'ei Ma'amad Dabar is a rule in halachic thinking, understanding halacha. Look what people do. Everyone takes a chicken out of the soup on Friday night. They eat it on Shabbos afternoon. How do they do it? It must be because there is a stipulation that allows us to do this and that. And what is the stipulation? What's the reason? Says that B'chaim Noah, because you're taking a large piece out of liquid. And similar ways, says in Minchas Yitzchak, it should be permissible to take the tea bag out of the water. That's a second issue with the tea, then that's the possible explanation of why that might be okay. But there's a third issue. The third issue is that when you take the tea bag out of the tea, you're also causing water, that when you lift the tea bag up, water pours out of the tea bag into the teacup, and you're separating that water from the, and the question is, how is that permissible? So, Shmir Shabbos Chalchasa says that there is a issue here, because it says in Sif Yud Ches, the Alter Rebbe says that, let's say you have a cup which has in it some, let's say it's wine, and has in also some seeds and some peel, and you want to pour the wine out of the cup because you want to drink it, and you don't want to drink it together with all the peels and seeds. So Alter Rebbe says in Sif Yud Ches, Muter laris and achas meklil chavera, you're allowed to pour from one cup to another slowly. In order that the part you don't want should remain in the first cup, on the bottom of the cup, and the good part will be in the next cup. You have to be careful. Be careful when the last drops are start pouring out of the cup. It's very noticeable that you're separating now the part you don't want from the part you want, because it's the majority of the liquid has poured out, and now there's a little bit of a few drops that are left, and you're pouring those few drops out from the peels and the grapes and from the seeds. It's noticeable you're separating them, and the Alter Rebbe says that's an issue. So he says, don't do that. Stop as soon as the flow of liquid stops and there's just drops. You're not allowed to pour anymore. And leave the last bit of liquid together with the peels and the seeds. Because if you're going to continue to pour, these last drops indicate that you are separating. So how is this allowed? How are you allowed to take the tea bag and the drops are going out of the tea bag into the water, separating them? Why is it permissible? So the Shmir Shabbos Chalchasa says the only way to do this really is with a spoon. You can't take the tea bag out, and you have to use a spoon so that you don't separate from that bit of liquid from the tea bag. There is another way to do this. Before I continue, I just want to point out one more thing about Beder regarding the fly. Before I just say there's another easier way to deal with this. Regarding the fly, we learned last time that according to Alter Rebbe, you're not allowed to take a little bit of soup together with a fly with a spoon out of the bowl, because although you're not just taking the bad, not just taking the bad out of the good, not just taking the fly out of the soup, you're also taking some of the soup with it too. The Alter Rebbe says don't rely on the opinion which says that that's okay. Don't take some soup with the fly, and therefore you're not just taking the bad out of the good, you're also taking some good out of the bad, a good out of the good too, and therefore it's okay. The Alter Rebbe says not to rely on this. Why not? So Tzemach Tzedek says the reason why is because it's clear what you're trying to do is to throw things in the garbage. You're not going to take this little bit of soup which is in your spoon and drink it now. You're throwing the soup with the fly in the garbage, and therefore it's clearly a situation of separating the bad from the good, despite the fact that there's still some soup there with the fly. Okay, getting back to the tea bag. So there is a easier way to deal with the second and third issue. One way to deal with it is that instead of taking the tea bag out of the tea and thus have the problem of how can you take the tea bag out in the first place, and the second of all, how can you allow the liquid to drip from the tea bag when you're pulling it out? Another way to do this is to pour the liquid out of the cup with the tea in it and pour the liquid into another cup. And when you get to the end, when there's still a few drops left, and the most liquid has gone out, you stop. But you could pour out most of the liquid from the cup which has the tea bag in it into another cup. And you're allowed to do that because you're pouring the good into the other cup. You want what you're pouring into that cup. You're allowed to take the good out of the bag. You're pouring what you want into the other cup, similar to what we learned last time that the Alter Rebbe says you're allowed to spill the fly together with the soup out of the bowl, because Halacha considers it as if you're taking the good out of the bad, you're taking the soup away from the fly. That's Halacha considers that act of pouring the fly with the soup into the garbage. So you ought to pour from the bowl in a similar way. You ought to pour from the cup into a second cup, pour the liquid into another cup, and leave in the first cup the tea bag. And that's perfectly fine. Your desire is for the tea, and you're pouring the tea into the new cup, and therefore that would alleviate the problem, the second and third problem of taking the tea bag out of the liquid, and the problem of the liquid flowing out of the tea bag when you lift the tea bag up. But it still wouldn't address the first problem, which is how is it possible to make the tea to begin with? So many people, they make tea essence before Shabbos, which was also perhaps something that helps also, as we'll see in Mitzvah Shem, the laws of cooking. That is something that is better for that halacha concern as well. Or it's also possible to have coffee. Anyways, a gute Nacht, all the best, and only good news.